Welcome to the Dialogue KE. Tonight, as earlier stated, we'll be discussing the scheduled royal visit in the country by the King of the United Kingdom, that is King Charles III, which is beginning tomorrow. King Charles and Camilla, the Queen Consort of the UK, will visit Nairobi and Mombasa cities between tomorrow and Friday. The trip comes amid calls by the Kenya Human Rights Commission demanding a public apology and compensation of victims of British historical injustices. To help us discuss this whole matter, I'm now joined in studio by the Kenya Human Rights Commission Program Advisor on matters citizenship and statelessness, Robert Waweru, and governance specialist Steve Ogutu. Karibuni sana to the show.
Asante.
I know, Robert, you really want to shed more light on the statement that you issued yesterday, but
Yes.
let's first begin. What does this visit mean to Kenyans and Kenya at large, knowing that it's King Charles' fourth official visit into the country, but first as the King of the UK? He first came to the country as a prince in 1971, 1978, and 1987. So what does this visit mean to us as Kenyans?
Thank you for having me.
Karibu sana.
I think to answer your question, I would say the answer to that question would depend on who you ask. I know Kenya is a country that the average age for Kenyans is about 19 years old. So a lot of Kenyans might not know what happened during the colonial times. And probably the only history that they know is of recent times.
Yeah.
So probably if you ask them, they don't have much to say. They think it's a positive thing. But now if you talk to people who lived during the colonial times, and especially during the emergency from 1952 to 1961, when the mother of King Charles was the reigning monarch, I think they will have a very different story to tell, because what they experienced then was bad,
All right.
to say the least.
All right.
It was brutal.
Okay, let me bring you into this discussion, Steve. I mean, as a governance specialist, what does this visit mean to Kenyans and to Kenya at large?
I think it's not too far from what Robert has said. I think his visit to a section of people in this country, it's going to elicit some memories, bitter memories of all the past. And already we are seeing that, just today I was watching some news item online of Mau Mau women protesting, and saying that, they need to see justice. Some of them lost their husbands, their fellow countrymen and women during the pre-colonial period, and they're demanding justice, which I think is justified. But there are also a section of Kenyans, like Robert has put it, who are not too familiar or didn't have a chance to experience the brutality of the colonialists. But I think broadly, on the other side, this visit would also be a good PR for the country.
Yeah.
Add value in terms of global brand visibility as a country.
You're talking about
But then it's just how we are going to take advantage of this as a country
right.
to market our country.
You're talking about global politics. And in the year 1952, actually, the late Queen Elizabeth was in the country when she found out that she had become a queen. And it's also the first Commonwealth country that King Charles is visiting. So how symbolic is this in matters of global politics?
I think that's really key. It's really key. And like I said, it just depends on how, as a country, do we have any strategy to take advantage of these visits to market our country? Because it's the first visit since the first visit by the king since his inauguration to outside Britain. And therefore, I hope the government machineries and those in charge of dockets like trade and foreign relations have really thought through and come up with a strategy to take this moment to really market the country well.
All right, Robert, let me pick your mind on the same issue.
Yes.
How symbolic is this in matters of global politics?
Well, of course, it's very symbolic. It's the first Commonwealth country that the king is visiting since becoming monarch. Of course, Kenya holds a very dear place in the royal family. As you said, his mother learned that she had become queen when she was here. Charles himself has come here four times before. This is going to be his fifth time. So it shows the importance of Kenya in the global scene right now. I mean, for him to come to Kenya ahead of all the other Commonwealth countries, it shows that. But unfortunately, when you look at all the hype that has been has come with this visit. I mean, what my good friend here is talking about, it's not there when you look at even international media. I mean, the only thing that is being discussed is about the colonial history of the relationship between Kenya and the British government, and the need for recognition of that not so good part of the history, and it has obviously overshadowed all the other positive things that would have come from this trip. But it shows the importance of having these discussions, because this is not a discussion that is not going to go away.
All right, I know you can't really discuss about that. We'll get to that.
But the hope also is that the king and the team, the king is going to really take this moment to really issue a meaningful apology, not just in words, but also provide actions on how they are going to address some of these very important issues that victims of oppressive colonial regime of the Britain are calling for.
All right. So in a statement, President William Ruto said that the talks with King Charles will focus on climate action, biodiversity, sustainable urban development, youth, technology and innovation, and women empowerment. How, in your own opinion, how do you think this will benefit the country?
I think on a broader scale, that's really important. But I think, in my view, the number one agenda in that item should be an apology to the Kenyan people.
The historical injustices.
Historical injustices and looking at what has been done and what needs to be done. I think we have a long way to go in terms of them addressing some of these issues. I mean, I believe you're a good student of history. Looking at the kind of issues that our forefathers went through while fighting for the independence of this country, so many lives were lost. Land alienation was a huge problem. Cultural degradation, is still biting us to date as a result of that. And so it's really deep. And I think that really should be the primary focus, one of the primary focus during his speech and even generally his visit. But I think beyond that, it is good that we see how we can cooperate with Britain as a country to help generate trade opportunities and then create employment for the youth, which I think is a big problem. To date, we have growing levels of crime, growing levels of idleness, and as a result, we see young people being used to cause chaos and violence. And I think that climate change is a big issue right now. And we need to see how these type of ties can help to strengthen climate actions, especially from the community upwards, which I think is missing.
All right. Yeah. I know we cannot downplay the fact that Kenya's dark colonial past really confronts the visit of King Charles III. And yesterday, your organization actually wrote an open letter to King Charles III. You listed critical human rights and governance abuses for immediate action, adding that key injustices committed during and post-colonial rule, whose social, economic, and political implications continue to be felt today. And if I can just list some of the things that you listed, as that political repression during the colonial rule, land alienation, gross human rights violation committed by the British corporates, conservation, which is the face of new colonialism and the presence of the British Army training unit in the country, that is Batuk.
Yeah.
Kindly explain on that.
Yeah, so I think it is important to underscore the fact that when we talk about the atrocities that were committed by the British, we tend to think that they only happened during the emergency from 1952 to 1961, but that's not the case. Remember, when the British were trying to establish the when they came in the late 1890s, 1880s, 1890s, when they were trying to establish the colonial most African communities resisted. The history is replete with examples of people like Mekatilili Wamenza, people like Koitarel Arap Samoe. You know what happened to all those people. So when you look at the statement that we issued yesterday, we're actually saying from the time that the British established the authority here in Kenya in 1895, there have been massive and systematic gross human rights violations that took that place up to the independence in 1963. But it did not end there. Remember, these are almost 70 years of colonialism, and some of the negative consequences of that time, we still feel them up to date. A very good example that I can give you is that the British they used what we call the divide and rule among the African communities, and that is what has created this animosity that you see between communities in Kenya that we fight almost every time when we have elections. You all remember what happened in 2007. That's the direct consequence of the British system of dividing, pitting one community against the other. And we all know this is a rule or a strategy that was used by many colonial powers. We all know what happened in Rwanda. But beyond that, you pick an example of land alienation, for example. The British, when they came, they introduced a series of acts and ordinances on land that had a very far-reaching consequence. Number one, most African communities were dispossessed of their land, and it was not peaceful dispossession of land. It was obviously very violent to create what is known as the White Highlands, where the white settlers used to practice their exploitation of both the natural resources and also the human capital, the human resources, because Africans were basically made to work like slaves. So, but after independence, and the National Land Commission actually illustrate this. What should have happened is that some of this land should have gone back to their original owners, but that did not happen. We know of people in Kenya who basically the African elites, but still many white settlers. They still retained some of the land that they had actually stolen from the people, and we see the consequences of that. I mean, these past few weeks, you have seen the demolitions that have been happening.
Yeah.
You saw the issue of the land, the Krima case. I mean, few individuals owning thousands and thousands and acres of land. It's a direct consequence from some of the policies that the British introduced. But there are also other new recent human rights violations that have taken place that are direct consequences of that. And I can give just two examples. I think this year, I think in February, the BBC produced a very powerful documentary about the sexual exploitation of female workers in two British-based tea companies, and that is Finlay's and Unilever. And about 70 women, came out to say how they had been, sexually harassed. And when you go back to history and where these companies are in the highlands of the Rift Valley, those communities, the Kipsigis and the Talai elders, they are still calling on their land to be given back. So there are many British multinational corporations that operate in Kenya. They operate with a lot of impunity. Another example is a company called Kakuzi. in 2021 they were forced to pay about 1 billion Kenya shillings for gross human rights violations that have been perpetrated by some of their workers. So you see, these British companies are very powerful. They are actually almost operate above the law. In fact, it's almost impossible to prosecute, to bring cases against them here in Kenya. In fact, for Kakuzi to pay that compensation, this matter had to be taken to London for them to a court in London for them to agree to pay. And it's also the same case with the Mau Mau case.
All right.
Yeah.
Let me bring you on this issue. And we've seen the presence of the British Army training unit in the country, that is Batuka, raising concerns even in the National Assembly. And actually, the family of Agnes Wanjiku, who was allegedly murdered by British troops 11 years ago near their barracks in Nanyuki, are demanding to meet King Charles. Wanjiru actually left behind a 5-month-old baby known as Stacy. I mean, what do you make of this?
I think it's really unfortunate, and I really appreciate the kind of work. I think we all appreciate the kind of work that the Kenya Human Rights Commission does in terms of bringing some of these issues to light. And my hope, and I believe this is the hope of every good-meaning Kenyan, is that we can see justice to her family, her daughter. It's really unfortunate, and not just that. Justice in terms of compensation, but also in terms of the perpetrator of that act, who I think, from what I read and from what we hear in the media, is still serving. He should really face very, very, very serious. He should really face the law. Whatever that takes. I think that will help to serve some bit of justice to that family. But I also think beyond that, beyond all these negatives and all these dark sides of our cooperation with the British since pre-colonial period to date, there are also some positives. Right. And I think Robert will agree with me.
Definitely. I mean, it cannot.
Right. We have some positives. And this is in terms of even way back, early back, them investing in education in this country. I think that has really helped to put Kenya in a very significant place in the global map in terms of our advancement as a country. I mean, the Kenya human resource is one of the best in the region. And when you look at the history of that, it dates back to those years, the foundations that were laid. And though it was very, very, very opposed, like Robert has put it, by certain chiefs, and a few chiefs, like the chief where I come from, I'm from Gem. So we had a chief there called Odera Kango.
Yes.
Who was very, very, is one of the few who collaborated. And as a result, I hear he would go to every home, and if he finds a child of a school-going age at home, he would beat the child and the parents and get them to school. So as a result, those kind of efforts brought some civilization and some advancement. Though right now, there is a big conversation around decolonization, whether it's in terms of development. There's still development, even the kind of donor funding that comes to the country that is still very top-down, still has that colonial mentality, colonial approach of top-down that doesn't really give communities the chance to be involved in their own development. And those of us in the development sector are really pushing back and saying, for us to have genuine development, then we have to do it from the community's perspective. We have to decolonize. We have to be bottom up, as we do these things. And I think there's a big conversation around going back to the indigenous ways of doing things. Yeah. Whether it's tackling issues of climate change, whether it's, how did we used to do things? And when you take a keen read of these issues, you realize we lost the way because of the impact of colonization. the introduction of the policies and the system meant that we had to really leave some of our ways of doing things as a Kenyan people and generally as African people. And those are the consequences that we are seeing as a result today.
All right.
Yeah.
Some of the recommendations that you made in the open letter,
Yeah.
King Charles, there are 5 of them. Number 1 is unconditional public apology and official acknowledgement of wrongs.
Yeah.
Number 2 is the documentation, repatriation, and repository of materials related to British atrocities, adequate reparations for all victims, human rights commitment and compliance, and number 5, involvement of all the victims, groups, and other key actors. Do you think these recommendations are going to be met when the king comes tomorrow?
These are recommendations that should be met. We don't, from where we sit, we don't see why they should not be met, because some of them do not cost anything. For example, the information, for example, do you know, if you want to do any research on some aspects of colonialism, those documents are not available. They're in Britain. And why should those documents be in Britain? I mean, they should be brought here. There are many other artifacts and art, that was stolen from Kenya and from many other African countries, and they're in British museums. What should they be doing in British Museum? We have our own museums here, the National Museums of Kenya, and we now have the new museum that is being opened at Uhuru Gardens. Some of these, we're asking for some of these artifacts and to be repatriated back, and we're also calling on the repatriation of the skulls. For example, why did they have to murder people and take the skulls back to Britain? Like, for example, Koitar Arab Somewhere, his family, they're still requesting for his skull to be brought back so that they can give him a proper send off in the African culture. But let me just say that some of the issues that we're raising here and some of the issues that you have mentioned here, these are deeply systemic issues that we need to be addressed holistically. For example, the issue of Batuk. You raised the issue of Batuk. The core of the problem is that, and as he said, the issue of top down is that we signed some of these agreements with Britain, but they are so lopsided, they are so unfair to us because we, like, for example, do you know, like, the British soldiers are actually immune of any prosecution of any criminal acts that they do here? That should not be accepted. It's not accepted. If you go to Britain and you commit a crime, you're going to be tried there, and if you're found guilty, you'll be jailed. Yeah. But why should they be given preferential treatment when they're here? It's because of what he's talking about. We still approach these issues with the old colonial mentality of the colonial master, and and that's just an example. And the very tragic story of Agnes, she was murdered in cold blood. The perpetrator was well known. He was allowed to return back to the UK, and now he's as he said, continuing with his life, while the family of Agnes and her daughter actually suffering. Let me just mention one issue about climate change. Climate change now is a buzzword, is the in thing.
Yeah.
But when you look at it also, it is coming with serious problems. We just recently had the African Climate Summit here in Nairobi, and even then you saw people protesting, saying that as countries in the global south, as Kenya, we don't contribute anything to the global warming and the greenhouse gases, but we are the ones who are suffering the most, and the countries that, Britain being one of them, countries that are actually at the forefront of destroying they don't want to commit to provide the finance that is needed by countries, poor countries like us, for adaptation and for mitigation. You have seen in the last few the kind of droughts that we have had and famine, and how the number of people that we have lost, and the number of even livelihoods, because most of these communities that are living in this area, they keep livestock, and we have lost hundreds of thousands of livestock. These are things that we should be, and these are commitments. We are not asking for them to to do something that they have not committed. In Paris, in Paris Agreement, they committed some money to help countries to be able to adapt.
All right.
But lastly, let me talk about now the conservation and where we have a big problem with the conservation industry. If you look at it,
Yeah.
it's also a very top-down Western sort of led initiative. Where if you go to some of these areas, these white people, they have huge tracts of land that they have basically fenced off and said these are sanctuary for wildlife, and they create these like lodges or where white tourists come from Europe or any other country and go and visit. And the when you look at the way it's being done, it's being done in such a way that it is dispossessing the local community of their lives and their livelihoods, because these communities keep livestock, and they're being told, for example, when you go there, to really cut down on the number of livestock that they're keeping, because the white people require this land to do conservation. And what we are saying, these communities have lived with these, they have been doing the traditional kind of conservation that they had done for all these years. In fact, it is the white people who came up with the issue of messing up with our environment.
All right. As you conclude, if
Yes.
at all these recommendations are not met,
Yeah.
as an organization, what are you going to do?
So obviously, one of the things that we do is do litigation, where we find that there are matters that can be addressed through litigation.
Yeah.
And so far, we have handled about 2 matters successfully. The Mau Mau case, they got some modest um, reparation. We are saying that's not enough, and it was only a small group, and also it is covering people who were maimed or tortured and brutalized during the Majes period. But we're saying these kind of reparations or should go back and cover all the affected groups in Kenya, and the king himself must make an effort when he comes to try meet some of these groups and issue an equivocal apology and commit to compensation and reparation for these groups.
All right. As you conclude, Steve, do you think this is the turning point to be able to mend the issues between the British and our country, as far as the colonial past is concerned?
I think it could be the starting point, not
The
really the
starting
turning
point.
point, because
All
it's
right.
it's a process, right? But I think that's, for me, as we conclude, I just want to endorse what the Kenya Human Rights Commission has put forth. We need to see not just apology, but also compensation of these families, but also not just compensation to those few surviving Mau Mau people, but also their children and their grandchildren, whose lives have been impacted by the consequences of how these colonial people dealt with their forefathers. Some were killed and all that. And we have seen how their families are still suffering to date. So I think that's really my parting share on this.
All right. So this is the starting point to mending the issues.
It should be the starting point.
All right.
Yeah.
That's a very nice point to end our discussion tonight on the Dialogue K. That has been Steve Ogutu, a governance specialist, and of course, the Kenya Human Rights Commission Program Advice on Matters Citizenship and Statelessness, Robert Waweru. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate
for
it.
having us.
And many thanks to you for watching the Dialogue K on behalf of the whole team that made this broadcast a success. Have yourselves a blessed night. My name is Kennedy Kimani, and my co-presenter on the Sunlight with Interpretation has been Boniface Moret.